Hey True Crime Besties, welcome back to an all-new episode of Serialously. Hey everybody, welcome back to an all-new episode of Serialously with me, Elise. And today is headline highlights, which means we are going over everything that is happening this week in the true crime world. And one of the cases that we actually are going to be discussing is one that so many of you guys have been leaving in my comments over on YouTube. I've been receiving some DMs, some emails, and it's the case about Naziyah Harris. And she's a 13-year-old girl. There's some really disturbing text messages have emerged, and so many of you guys have just wanted me to talk about it, to share what we know, what's going on with it, because it was kind of, a confusing and a little bit of a complex case. So we are going to be talking about that today. We also are going to be talking about updates in the case of the missing girl from North Carolina, which I talked about in last week's headline highlights. And don't worry, for those of you who didn't listen to last week, even though you should have, I will give you a little recap of what is going on over there. We're going to talk about some brand new cases that, of course, broke this week. One case that we're talking about is about a couple who lived with multiple dead bodies in a freezer for months and months and months. I mean, there is definitely a lot for us to talk about today. So get cozy. I don't know if you're driving, if you're at home, if you're cleaning, if you're maybe scrubbing toilets, whatever it is you're doing, you're going to be with me for a minute because we have got a lot to talk about. Now, I want to start off with this new case that I found very interesting, and a lot of people are talking about it because it's about a best-selling author who is now facing sexual allegations. Okay, so Neil Gaiman is a British best-selling author, and he's known for being one of the most popular comic and fiction authors of this generation. But last week, he made headlines for something very different from the books, the movies, or the TV shows that he's been involved in, because this author is now facing a series of sexual misconduct accusations. Now, if you're not familiar with Neil, he wrote The Sandman, and also, what's that other one? It was I think it was Tim Burton, Coraline. I'd never watched it personally, so I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it. But both of those have been turned into a TV series and a movie. However, now, New York Magazine came out with an article that is called, quote, "There is no safe word." And in this article, it contains the stories of 8 different women who talk about their experiences with Neil. Now, the first allegation came to light back in 2023. It specifically came to light on a podcast series that was called Master: The Allegations Against Neil Gaiman. And the podcast shared the stories of 5 different women, and originally these women stayed anonymous or even used fake names to really try and protect their privacy, yet they were speaking out with their experiences. And now, over the last couple of years, even more women have come forward, really corroborating their stories. And this is just a snippet from the opening of that podcast series, but I want you to take a listen.
Several of the women said to us, "We don't want him to be cancelled. We just want him to stop. We just want him to be held accountable for his behaviour in these situations with very young women."
Should we start from the start? How does the story all begin?
I was at home on Exmoor, and I checked my DMs from my public Instagram account, which I look at once in a blue moon. And there was a message from a woman, a young woman, saying, "I've got a question, can I have your email address?" Sent her my email address, nothing happened. A week later, I got the long email making accusations against Neil Gaiman that led to the creation of this podcast.
So let me start by saying this. Apparently, Neil has some kind of obsession with BDSM. So some of these women did say that they did end up participating in some of these activities with Neil, but that there was often a lack of consent and that he would use this kind of abuse of power that he had over them. And Neil is a very powerful man. He's got lots of money, lots of influence, and with that comes a lot of intimidation. So the allegations take place over several years with all sorts of different women, as I mentioned. And one of the main accusers in this article was a woman named Scarlett Pavolich. And she was a former nanny for Neil and for his ex-wife. So one day, Scarlett apparently was taking a bath in Neil's house. Then, all of a sudden, he just came in, allegedly got into the tub with her, naked, and just started kind of making advances against her. He then asked her to sit on his lap, which she said no to, but from there he escalated and he allegedly sexually assaulted her. She went on to say that over time, Neil continuously coerced her into these sexual encounters, and she even said that one time he forced her to perform oral sex on him, and that during that he was so violent with her, if you can imagine what's happening, moving the head, you catch my drift, but that he was so violent with her that she ended up vomiting. Now, this next part is very, very gross, but she said that after she threw up, because he was so forceful, he forced her to eat it. Really disgusting, right? Like, forced her to eat her own vomit. Now, another woman came forward named Caroline Wallner, and she shared her experience, and her story was very similar to Scarlett's. Caroline worked as a caretaker in one of Neil's houses, and she said that these sexual encounters kind of became sort of transactional, and she was used to them since she was living there for quite some time. However, she said that when it crossed the line for her was when they were lying in bed with Neil's child one night, and Neil reached across his kid, grabbed Caroline's hand, and placed it on his penis. She ended up receiving a $300,000 settlement, all in exchange for signing an NDA and for leaving, the property and no longer having a job, but some really gross accusations. Another woman named Catherine Kendall said that there was one time when she and Neil were in a hotel together and he climbed on top of her even though she clearly did not want him to. Later, he offered her $60,000 for therapy. And that's not all. Another woman named Kendra Stout said that she and Neil went on a trip together, and even though she had a health condition and didn't want to have sex with him and was saying no, that he forced himself on her anyway. And she used, as the actual word of what took place. Now, Neil and his lawyers have so far denied all of these accusations, calling them, quote, fake and deplorable. But representatives of Neil also said that sexual degradation, bondage, domination, sadism, and masochism may not be everyone's taste, but between consenting adults, BDSM is lawful. So they're really trying to make the argument that yes, he was into this BDSM lifestyle, 50 Shades of Grey and then some, but that, and kind of saying, we know that might not be everybody's taste, that might just be certain people's fetishes and kinks, but it doesn't make it illegal. Which, you're right, it certainly doesn't make it illegal. But it is illegal when somebody says no and they force themselves on them anyway. I mean, that's 100% illegal. I think we can all agree on that. Now, with all these allegations coming to light, Neil's film projects have definitely been affected. Yet, what's interesting is his fans are definitely coming to his defense. And I think we're always going to see something like that where women come out, they share their story, their truths, and charges may come. You're facing all these accusations. It seems like he settled quite a few times as well to try to keep things quiet. But a lot of people are on his side, saying that these women are extorting him, that they were willing participants, and mostly that's his fans and people who idolize him who are saying that, but it still is making this very, very messy. So research it, take what you want with it, and we will follow it closely. Now, I know in my last couple episodes, I have been saying, or asking, I should say, like, what's in the water in New York City right now? But once again, we are back in New York. This time because a 14-year-old boy named Caleb Rijos was stabbed in New York City while he was walking to school. Just a 14-year-old boy walking to school and was stabbed. So Caleb was walking on East 138th Street when around 9:25 a.m., this random man just came up to Caleb, completely unprovoked, and stabbed him twice. And not only just stabbed him, not as though that's okay, but stabbed him in the heart twice. Caleb, then terrified and scared, and just remember, a 14-year-old boy, he called his father right after he was stabbed. He told his father that he, quote, couldn't breathe and that he was scared. And his father, unfortunately, this is super haunting and just unimaginable, but after Caleb called him, his father was then forced to listen to his son dying over the phone. Caleb was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately, the doctors could not save him. Now, the big question in all of this, of course, is like, who did this? What kind of monster would do this? Police have now arrested 29-year-old Waldo Mejia, and let me tell you, when you take a closer look into this guy's history, you will think the same exact thing that I did. How on earth was this guy, this creep, this monster, even allowed to be walking the streets? Because Waldo has an extensive history of mental health problems and run-ins with the NYPD. In fact, just days earlier, literally days earlier, Waldo stabbed a man in the arm inside a subway station. And this subway station, guys, was on the same corner where he murdered Caleb. Now, in addition to that, Waldo was also arrested this past November for harassment of his neighbor. Now, this neighbor caught all of this on their Ring camera footage. And get this, because this footage, if you're not watching this on YouTube, guys, and just listening, I highly encourage you to go watch the YouTube version. But it is so eerie because when Waldo saw that there was a camera there, you see him get angry and then punch the wall. Minutes later, he starts walking down the stairs toward the camera with a knife and then stabs the camera until it shattered, because this was an indoor Ring camera that pointed at the stairs. It is so eerie and twisted because you literally, it's almost as though the POV, the point of view, is like you're the camera, right? And so it looks like he's walking towards you down the stairs and then he sees the camera and just starts stabbing it. So he was arrested for that. But then just 3 days later, the neighbor said that Waldo was released and then back in this apartment building. The neighbor said that sometimes he would not sleep at all when he was thinking about Waldo. That's how terrified he was. At a press conference, police even called Waldo a violent man with a documented history of mental health interactions with the NYPD. I mean, this guy had 4 prior arrests and they were all unsealed, and it kind of just goes to show that he clearly was a danger. I mean, a danger to society 1,000 times, right? Now, on the day that he stabbed Caleb, images of Waldo from security cameras were posted online, and from these images, you can see a police officer actually realizing that he was the same man that was wanted for that stabbing in the subway station just days earlier. Police then went to his home the night after the stabbing and, of course, arrested him. And when they arrested him, they said that he was wearing the exact same sneakers and pants that he wore during the murder. He also still had a knife on him. They also found a pair of white gloves that Waldo wore during the attack, and they also reported that the knife that he still had was still bloody. So finally, now, Waldo currently remains in jail with no bond, and he's there on murder, manslaughter, and weapon charges. Meanwhile, Caleb's community, poor 14-year-old Caleb, they are just reeling. They held a memorial basketball game and a vigil to honor him and to also support his family. Caleb's cousin, Kayla, said that Caleb had the absolute biggest heart, that he wanted to be a football player, and he just wanted to take care of his family.
He always walked with a smile on his face, no matter what he was going through. He was always close to his family. He was really a family person.
Before the basketball game, the community gathered to release balloons that were light blue, which was Caleb's favorite color, and they're just demanding justice for Caleb's murder.
The violence, we love Caleb, we want to grow up. It's unacceptable for people to be killed. Kids being killed by crazy on the street. No more can we tolerate this. And if you're an elected official, shame on you for not standing up and doing something different.
Caleb was an innocent victim. He was literally just an innocent 14-year-old boy walking to school. And he had his whole life ahead of him. And this lunatic who had a history just comes out of nowhere and stabs him twice in the heart. And so scared, which again is just so heartbreaking, he was so scared that all he knew to do was call his dad and just say, "I'm hurt, I can't breathe." And it breaks my heart for his whole family, and especially for his dad, who had to hear that and have that be his last memory of his son. It is just incredibly sad. So I'm hopeful that Waldo is finally held accountable and locked up for, honestly, the rest of his life. Now we're going to move into a very disturbing, unsettling case right now. I want to warn you, if you are eating, you might want to take a break. If you haven't eaten yet, better. You probably won't want to eat after this though, but it's very disgusting and disturbing. So on New Year's Eve in Washington, police entered a home only to find the grisling sight of an old married couple. They had been murdered and stored in a freezer. But that's not all that they found. In the home, authorities also found this couple's son and his girlfriend, and they were both dead. So 4 dead people. And this story is definitely a very chilling mystery. So let me kind of back up. So the older couple's names were William, who was 68 years old, and Eileen, who was 66 years old. They were reportedly killed by multiple stab wounds, and William also suffered from blunt force trauma. Now, their son, Shane, along with his girlfriend, Sue, were also found dead inside the home, as I mentioned. They, however, both died of gunshot wounds. Shane's death has been confirmed a suicide, but the circumstances of Sue's death are, quote, undetermined. Now, what is confirmed is that Shane was definitely the last person to die out of all 4 of them. Authorities ended up finding this horrific, quadruple death scene when they were conducting a welfare check after some family members became worried after not speaking to any of them for a while. And it's not clear which bodies the investigators found first, but it is clear that they were shocked to find 4 dead family members inside this house. William and Eileen, Shane's parents, were found in this leaking, disgusting kitchen freezer. On the outside of the fridge, there were a couple of suspicious notes, which the police realized, were indicators of the parents' dead bodies, but take a listen.
The post-it notes seemed to indicate the contents of the fridge were for the bodies of the parents. They had some notes about dates and times.
So there were 2 notes that were found. One read, time of death, July 24th, 5:45 a.m. And the other one read, time of death, July 24th, 3 p.m., which is so creepy to me because it sounds like their son literally wrote down the exact time that he murdered them. Police have said that Shane is, of course, the main suspect in his parents' murders, but they're still unsure if his girlfriend Sue was an accomplice in all of this or if she had anything to do with it. Also, Shane's parents were killed in July, and according to a medical examiner and the notes on the top of the freezer, that means that Shane and Sue were living in this house for 6 months while his parents' dead bodies were in that freezer. They were literally living in a house with dead bodies inside of it for half a year. And not just any dead bodies, not that would make it okay, but his parents. By the looks of it, this is seeming like a case of extremely poor mental health, but not entirely sure because unfortunately we've also seen some cases where, kids, siblings, spouses do live in the house with deceased bodies. One person we talked about last year even drove around in a car for weeks and weeks with the dead bodies in his car. But anyway, back in November, Sue had posted online that her and Shane were considering suicide. She was very vocal about it. Officers conducted multiple welfare checks after she posted this, of course, because there was a lot of concern. But in the end, nothing ever happened because the police could not legally enter the home. And everything also appeared normal from the outside, so it wasn't like they could just enter the house and check on things, right? So the investigation is still leaving so many unanswered questions. But the police now believe that Shane and Sue participated in what they're calling a collaborative suicide, even though Sue had died before Shane. The motive, though, for Shane's parents' murder is still unknown. However, the police said that they are closing the case since they now don't have anyone to charge with the crime, since they're all dead. But even so, what a devastating case, and it probably does go back to mental health or depression or something of that nature, but I don't know what the motive would be for the murder. That doesn't make much sense, and even though they can't charge anyone with a crime, it feels as though, to me at least, there should still be some more investigation done to give his parents, family members, and friends closure and answers, right? And it's just chilling knowing that this couple was living with his parents' dead bodies in the house, and then Shane and Sue, for whatever reason, or maybe it was their plan all along, but they felt like there was no way out other than taking their own lives. It's just, I don't know. It's another case that kind of just leaves you scratching your head, right? You don't really know what to make of it. All right, now before we continue, we are going to take a quick break, hear from today's sponsors, and thank you guys so much for understanding that sponsors are essential to keeping this podcast free. All right, you know what? The start of a new year always seems like a perfect time for a fresh start, right? We make resolutions to eat better, to exercise more, to break all of our bad habits. But the one thing that we often overlook, or I know that I have definitely overlooked, is our finances. Getting out of debt can feel impossible, but it doesn't have to be. PDS Debt makes it simple with a personalized debt solution just for you. So if it feels like you're making payments every month, but your balances aren't budging, PDS Debt can help. Whether you have $10,000 or more in eligible debt, there is no minimum credit score required. Bad and fair credit are accepted. And you can save money while paying off your debt in a fraction of the time, which, again, I know how overwhelming debt can feel, but taking that first step, it really does make all the difference. I wish I knew about PDS Debt sooner because I am like a sucker for the point bonuses at sign up for credit cards, the miles, the this, the that. And really, before you know it, it's like the interest rate is killing you. You have all this debt. For me, it was always like I would just avoid it rather than actually address it. So I wish I knew about this service way, way sooner than I found out about it. So if you guys are looking to kind of make those steps, even though it does feel overwhelming, check out PDS Debt, and why not start now? I mean, make this the year that you take control of your debt. Get a free debt analysis right now at pdsdebt.com/save. It only takes 30 seconds. That's pdsdebt.com/save. pdsdebt.com/save. You know, I've always been mindful about taking care of my hair, but after having kids and just dealing with the everyday stress of life, I noticed that my hair wasn't looking as thick and as healthy as it used to. Particularly, I noticed kind of like around my hairline, it was starting to get like a little patchy, and when I would pull my hair back into a top knot, you could like see my scalp a little bit, and it made me like super insecure. But that's when I found Nutrafol, and honestly, I wish I had started it sooner. Nutrafol takes a whole body approach to hair health, working from the inside out to really target key root causes like stress, hormones, and even nutrition. And I love that it's physician formulated with 100% drug-free ingredients. After taking Nutrafol for a few months, I started noticing less shedding, my hair just felt stronger overall, it felt thicker, and it's been such a confidence booster. Nutrafol is the #1 dermatologist-recommended hair growth supplement brand that is trusted by over 1 million people. So start your hair growth journey with Nutrafol. For a limited time, Nutrafol is offering our listeners $10 off your first month's subscription and free shipping when you go to Nutrafol.com and enter the promo code AE. Find out why over 4,500 healthcare professionals and stylists recommend Nutrafol for healthier hair. Nutrafol.com, spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code AE. That's Nutrafol.com, promo code AE. Okay, guys, so this next update is about an extremely sad case that happened back in July. We also did talk about it. I can't remember if we talked about it on Headline Highlights or if it was one of our Friday bonus episodes. I think it was Headline Highlights, but it was July 29th, and 3 young girls who were on summer vacation were attending a Taylor Swift-themed dance and yoga class over in the UK. It was supposed to be a beautiful day of, dancing, making friendship bracelets for the girls, and just being Swifties and having fun. But unfortunately, it turned out to be a day of absolute horror and violence. 18-year-old Axel Rudakubana, who was 17 years old at the time, had planned out a stabbing rampage, and he ended up murdering 3 young girls, along with trying to kill 10 other people. See, out of nowhere, Axel ran into this building that the yoga and dance class was in and just began stabbing these girls. It was like a frenzy. It was like he was on some sort of rampage or frenzy. I don't even know how you can describe it. But the victims were so incredibly young. Their names were 9-year-old Alice Aguiar, 7-year-old Elsie Stancombe, and 6-year-old BB King. Now, Axel also stabbed 2 adults and 8 other kids who were all immediately rushed to the hospital for their injuries. Alice, Elsie, and BB unfortunately could not be saved though. And as you can imagine, the community was absolutely rocked by this attack. I mean, it was just so heartbreaking. People who were getting together just for innocent fun and music and togetherness, and this monster just came in on this full-blown stabbing frenzy. Taylor Swift and King Charles even met with some of the families after the attack, and Taylor Swift also posted a message online the day after the attack. It read, "The horror of yesterday's attack in Southport is washing over me continuously, and I'm just completely in shock. The loss of life and innocence and the horrendous trauma inflicted on everyone who was there, the families, the first responders, these were just little kids at a dance class." Now, Axel pleaded not guilty last month, but prosecutors were obviously determined to put this guy behind bars. But something changed over the course of the few months, and now he has entered a guilty plea, which it'll save families and loved ones and witnesses a lot of pain and trauma by now not having to go through with a trial. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of murder, 10 counts of attempted murder, and he also pleaded guilty to additional charges related to possessing poison, also weirdly for having an Al-Qaeda manual. Aside from pleading guilty, Axel was pretty much refusing to speak. He didn't really say his name, he didn't identify himself, he just responded saying guilty in a very quiet voice. He now faces life imprisonment, and at his sentencing, the victims' families and the surviving victims will be present. But the authorities still have no idea what Axel's motive was. I mean, this was a completely senseless and unnecessary act of violence. It should have never happened, and because of him, these 3 little girls lost their lives in such a devastating way. It's just horrible. And now thinking what those families have to go through, I mean, just thank God this guy is seeing justice. Now, I want to give you some updates about a case that I covered last week here on Headline Highlights, and that is the murder of Heather Williams in North Carolina. Now, when I covered it last week, a lot of information was still missing, so it ended on, a bit of a cliffhanger. But just to recap, 25-year-old Heather was last seen on January 4th on Ring camera footage, leaving her house and getting into a gray 4-door sedan. Heather looked like she got into this car willingly, but then after looking at the footage, none of her family or friends recognized this car, so it wasn't anybody that they knew. There were questions about if she had maybe met somebody online, if she was secretly going out to meet them, but nobody really had any concrete answers. But after that night, Heather went missing. No one had seen from her, heard from her, or had any idea where she could have been. All they knew was that she had gotten into that car with this unknown person. Now, if you don't remember, Heather also had suffered a car accident and had severe cognitive impairment. She had to take medication every day, and because of this, she was immediately classified as missing and endangered. Her family then reached out to the media asking if anyone had any information, any info at all, to just please come forward and help them find Heather. But on January 10th, they unfortunately received heartbreaking news because Heather's body had been found dead in a wooded area. Now, looking at Heather's phone records, her last call that was made went out to an unknown number. And this number belonged to whoever was driving the car that night that she, got picked up and then went missing. And as some people suspected, it ended up being a man that she met on Facebook. It looked as if Heather was going out on some sort of online date and was just kind of sneaking out to go meet this person. Originally, police didn't release the name of the driver, which led everyone to believe that he probably was a suspect and there was probably a reason that they weren't releasing his name. And as it turns out, that theory was 100% right, because 30-year-old Tyrell Searmans was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. And let me just say, this guy has some criminal history that is very, very frightening. A former employer of Tyrell said that Tyrell has mental issues and that he should have never been released from his prior conviction. The employer said that he hired Tyrell for some construction work, but then he had to fire him after only 6 months because he just couldn't do his work, he was rude to customers, he was unpredictable, it just was not a good fit. However, what happened next is just insane, because after he got fired, Tyrell kidnapped him. He also beat him up. He even shot him, which thankfully he survived, but he tried to retaliate so hard on his boss. This guy also said that Tyrell also tried shooting his fiance, then tried to burn his house on fire while they were still inside of it. I mean, just absolutely wild, and kind of takes retaliation to a whole other level, if I'm being honest, but very scary and clearly, unstable in some regard, in my opinion. Now get this though, Tyrell only received 5 years in prison for this attack because he ended up taking a plea deal, so he was cut short, he didn't have to go much longer. The employer though said if Tyrell was given the proper sentence the first time, Heather would still be alive. Not trying to be disrespectful, just being honest. Tyrell was denied bond at his first hearing, and if he's convicted, he faces life in prison or even the death penalty. Heather's sister Mary attended the hearing, and she said, quote, "We lost Heather, a daughter and a sister. And to think that, that a whole 25 years of life can be taken away at the hands of one person, it's just hard to wrap your head around. It's unfathomable." And in an interview, Mary also said that she doesn't blame the justice system for letting Tyrell out of prison. She just solely blames him.
Yeah, it's awful to see his record and to know that he's done something very similar to this and, did a stint in prison and was able to be back out on the streets. Unfortunately, it's just the world we live in, where you want to give people the benefit of a doubt and you want to think they can be reintegrated back into society and make good decisions. And it's so hard to believe that there's evil in this world that exists to do these kinds of things to people. And so, I'm not angry at the justice system or at the people who, didn't keep him locked up. I'm angry at him because he's who to blame. He's the one that made the decisions. And, other people shouldn't have to answer for his actions because he's the one who did this and he is the one with evil in him.
It also just breaks my heart, and it's so aggravating that this girl survived a horrific car accident. She was in a coma for months. She had to relearn how to walk, speak, live her life, and basically just start over. I mean, she was such a fighter and such a strong woman and so resilient and came through so much. And then, as she gets through all of that, she just is murdered by some scumbag. A guy who was known to be a violent, dangerous, and disgusting person and who was just released from prison. It's just so sad. And some of the initial thoughts, of course, were that when they were first speculating that she had met somebody online was like, okay, this poor girl, she's probably just trying to feel seen, feel like a normal 25-year-old, and this guy just capitalized on that and totally took advantage of that. And it's really scary because it shows you what people can be like who you meet online. It's just very, very, it's just unsettling and scary, and it makes me worry for humanity and as a parent. Now, let me talk about this next case because this is the one that so many of you have been asking me to cover, and it's the case about Naziyah Harris. So I'm going to give you some backstory, and then we're going to talk about what's going on with this case. Now, Naziyah had first gone missing back on January 9th. She got off her school bus and then never was seen again. However, now Jarvis Butts, a 42-year-old man, has been charged in the murder of 13-year-old Naziyah Harris. Jarvis is pleading not guilty, but he's facing charges of murder, criminal sexual conduct, and child sex abuse. Now, although he is charged with murder, her body has not been found. As I mentioned, she was last seen on January 9th getting off her bus, but nothing has been found since then. However, Jarvis was allegedly having a relationship with Naziyah, and he also has allegedly been sexually assaulting her since 2022. Apparently, the reason they knew each other and the reason they had a relationship is because he was the father of one of her cousins, so her uncle. Now, Jarvis also has an extensive history of sexual assault with minors. Prosecutors said that Jarvis has also sexually assaulted an 8-year-old family member and a girlfriend's 4-year-old daughter. So disgusting, too, because apparently when he assaulted the 4-year-old, this 4-year-old caught chlamydia from the assault. Absolutely disgusting. And I mean, like, what kind of pervert, disgusting freak does this? Police have said that even though they haven't found Naziyah's body yet, there is a lot of evidence supporting that Jarvis is the killer. And one piece of disturbing evidence was the text messages that were found between the two of them. And let me just say to you right now, these text messages are truly disgusting. These text messages were read out loud in court, and along with these text messages were also nude photos that were being sent back and forth. In these texts, which I'm not going to read all of them and put them all on display, but you can Google them, they are very sexually explicit messages. Jarvis is asking for nudes, he's asking for oral sex, and it just paints the picture of like a predator grooming type relationship. Remember, he was 42, she was 13. The texts also reveal that Naziyah was pregnant and that Jarvis knew that she was pregnant at the time that she went missing. According to his search history, after he found out that Naziyah was pregnant, he was looking up terminations, termination pills, even reading about drinking red antifreeze as a method to terminate. And on the day that Naziyah went missing, January 9th, Jarvis was supposed to turn himself into the police on a gun charge that he had. However, that date ended up getting pushed back to February. So because he didn't go to the police station and turn himself in, he instead met up with Naziyah. The two of them apparently took a short trip together, and then Jarvis checked into a motel. The next day, he was tracked to a river, and the police found the clothing that Naziyah was last seen wearing. Authorities said that the clothing looked like there could have been a struggle, and based on this, people believe that Jarvis either didn't want to deal with the baby, so he killed Naziyah, or he tried to perform his own sick, twisted termination and ended up killing her, or that he didn't want to get charged with sexual assault. So he couldn't have evidence of that, so he had no choice but to kill Naziyah and the child. Either way, whatever the situation and truth is, the suggestion is that he was just trying to cover everything up. In court, the judge said to Jarvis, "You're the monster in this whole picture." And here's a clip from when the judge sends Jarvis to trial, and it is truly a very difficult listen because you can just hear the disdain in her voice.
But from what I heard today and over the last 4 or 5 days, it appears he intended to perform what he thought was a do-it-yourself abortion on Naziyah, and it went south, and instead of seeking medical attention for her, he intentionally killed her and tried his best to cover it up. As much as I want her to be alive today, there is at least probable cause to show and believe that she's dead and that she was murdered by Jarvis Butt. Mr. Butt, stand up. You've been sitting over there for 4 days with your head down, sitting between and behind your attorneys with your mask on and taking vigorous notes. I want you to pay attention and listen to everything I have to say. I have been trying to figure out for the last 5 days, you. At one point, I thought you were cognitively impaired in the beginning of this exam. And then maybe you had the brain of a 10-year-old, and that's why you were doing such things. But as I heard more and more testimony, you're just the true definition of a pedophile. Watching you laugh and brag about all the women you have with different women and the children and the girlfriends, and making babies to groom them and having them in your presence, cleaning up your shop, and the little girls around you, has landed you here today. You groomed naziyah. You played mind games with her. We all heard that. You controlled her emotionally. She was exposed to so much at such a young age. The text messages between you two were disgusting to hear. And to think that she had you saved in her phone as bae for life. Naziyah deserves so much more. And while I mentioned other people that failed her, Jarvis Butts, you are the monster in this whole picture.
Naziyah was so young, and she absolutely was failed by those who were supposed to protect her. Her story is one of those that is very difficult to hear, but it needs to be shared because so badly she deserves justice, and her unborn child. Naziyah's cousin Roxy, who didn't live in Detroit with Naziyah, said that she wants this story to reach everyone because it's not only happening in Detroit, but it's happening everywhere. She said women and young girls deserve justice, and anyone suffering from sexual assault deserves to be heard, which I couldn't agree more, 1000%. Even though it's really difficult for us to share these stories and hear these stories, it is so important because we need to shine a light on what is really going on out there. And I was talking about this yesterday for some reason with, was it my husband or was it my friend? I can't remember, but I don't know the exact statistic off the top of my head. I'd have to go back and look, but it's like a staggering percentage. And again, I don't know that this is accurate, but I'm making it up, but something like 80% or even higher of sexual assaults against children happen with people who are close to the child, not strangers, not random people walking on the street, but people who are trusted adults, family members, teachers, coaches, friends. It's like you just have to always look at things very closely and be on alert. It's sad, but it's the truth. So that is what we have got this week for headline highlights. But as a reminder, Friday I am doing a mini case deep dive. It's a bonus episode. You can get access to that over on Patreon or over on Apple Podcasts. But this Friday we'll be talking about the case of Jessica Barnes. She's a South Carolina woman who went missing this past August. And this case turned out to be way more complicated than just a missing persons case. It unleashed this whole web of lies. I mean, relationships, polygamy, pregnancies, this guy who had multiple wives and wasn't telling them that he was married to multiple people. Then he added a third woman into this like house of horrors. I mean, it's a very, very recent case. It hasn't been closed. The hearings and the trials are still going on, but we are talking about everything. So you can listen to that this Friday right here on Apple Podcasts or over on Patreon. That's where you can get access. I'll link everything in the show notes of this episode. And when you sign up, you also not only will hear that, but you will unlock about 75 extra bonus episodes. So if you're ever looking for more content to binge and little mini case deep dives, you can check it out over there. All right, guys, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode with me. I will be back with you first thing Monday morning with an all new deep dive into a case. But until then, please stay safe. Please watch your back. Don't join any cults and just be nice and don't kill people. All right, guys, thanks for tuning in, and I will talk with you soon. Bye.